Clearwater, a quiet town with its serene beaches and close-knit community, felt like a safe and welcoming place. However, the scorching sun of the summer of 2021 was beginning to hide a dark shadow that would form in the following months. Mark Davis, a respected and successful businessman, lived with his wife Linda and their two young children in an elegant, comfortable home that reflected the stability his family had built over the years. Mark was a man dedicated to work and family. Life seemed to be in balance, until one summer night changed everything. During a business get-together, Mark met Julia Carter. Julia was a charming woman, with an intense gaze and a magnetic presence that immediately captured Mark's attention. They exchanged glances and smiles, and the chemistry between them was palpable. Julia seemed to have an aura of mystery and sophistication, characteristics that Mark found irresistible. Their conversation flowed easily, and by the end of the night, Mark found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't experienced in a long time. What started as a simple flirtation soon turned into something more. Over the next few days, Julia became a constant presence in Mark's life. They texted and called each other frequently. Mark tried to keep the relationship professional, but the growing attraction between them was difficult to ignore. Julia, with her seductive and intriguing way, began to become more and more involved in Mark's life, making him feel special and desired. What Mark initially saw as a fleeting, exciting affair soon began to evolve into something more complicated. Julia wasn't satisfied with just being an occasional lover. She wanted more. She began to insinuate that Mark should consider leaving her to live with her. Julia's constant pressure and advances began to make Mark feel uncomfortable, but the passion and desire he felt for her made it difficult to resist. In a moment of weakness, Mark decided to spend a night with Julia, breaking his commitment to his family. The encounter was intense and emotional, but it also left Mark feeling guilty and uneasy. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but Julia's influence was too powerful to ignore. Meanwhile, Linda, Mark's wife, began to notice changes in his behavior. Mark was more distant, frequently late for family commitments, and visibly distracted. Linda worried about him, but Mark managed to divert her attention with excuses and promises that everything was fine. The situation started to get complicated when Julia started to show possessive behavior. She demanded more attention, and whenever Mark tried to pull away, Julia became angry and threatening. His influence on Mark became increasingly harmful. The difference between desire and danger was beginning to blur. What seemed like an innocent and engaging affair was slowly turning into an out-of-control situation. Emily's obsession was just beginning to reveal itself, and Mark was about to find himself in a nightmare he couldn't have predicted. Clearwater's tranquility would be shattered by an impending tragedy that would challenge all limits of control and obsession. This chapter marks the beginning of a story of passion, obsession, and destruction, where the lives of Mark Davis and his family would be irrevocably changed by a psychopathic lover who was willing to do anything to get what she wanted. After the intimate and emotionally charged meeting between Mark and Julia, the dynamic between them changed radically. What began as a romantic adventure turned into a dangerous and uncontrollable obsession. Julia Carter, with her beauty and charm, now demonstrated possessive and controlling behavior that began to threaten the stability of Mark's life. The first sign that things were getting out of hand came when Julia started calling and texting Mark at all hours of the day and night. The calls, initially occasional, became incessant. Julia wanted to know every detail of Mark's life, from his work commitments to his time with his family. The constant pressure was evident for Mark, who was desperately trying to balance his involvement with Julia and his responsibilities as a husband and father. Mark, aware that his life was starting to fall apart, tried to set boundaries. He explained to Julia that he needed space and that his family should be the priority. However, his attempts at distancing were met with anger and manipulation. Julia began to act threateningly, showing jealousy and obsessive control that Mark had never anticipated. Julia's behavior became increasingly disturbing. She began showing up unannounced at Mark's house, waiting for him outside of work and sending unsolicited gifts such as flowers and jewelry. The situation reached a point where Julia began blatantly invading Mark's privacy. On one occasion, she showed up at Mark's house when he was alone, forcing him to confront her. The meeting was marked by a tense and uncomfortable scene, where Julia expressed her displeasure with Mark trying to distance himself from her. Julia's obsession wasn't just limited to Mark. She began to direct her anger and frustration at Linda and the children. One night, Linda found an anonymous letter on her front door, which contained subtle threats and a detailed description of her family's daily movements. The letter stated that Julia would not give up until Mark was completely with her, and that any attempt to disrupt her plans would have serious consequences. The situation was clearly getting out of control. Linda, alarmed and worried for her family's safety, decided to seek help. She filed a report with the local police, reporting the harassment and threats. The police became aware of the case and made some routine visits to Mark's house to check on the situation, but Julia's behavior was increasingly furtive and difficult to track. Julia's obsessive behavior was a vicious cycle. Whenever Mark tried to set a limit, Julia reacted with even greater intensity, tightening her control over him. The Davis family began to live in a constant state of fear and tension. Linda was especially concerned about the safety of the children, who were also beginning to realize something was wrong. During this time, Mark tried to protect his family while keeping Julia at arm's length. He attended therapy sessions to deal with the stress and guilt he felt about being involved with Julia. However, his actions were constantly undermined by Julia's unpredictable and aggressive behavior. What appeared to be a case of unhappy passion was quickly turning into a security crisis. Julia's obsession showed no signs of slowing down, and the pressure on Mark and his family was growing by the day. The domestic environment became a house of tension, where every false step could result in a new threat. Julia's escalating obsessive behavior culminated in an impending storm. Julia's increasingly unpredictable behavior was about to manifest itself in even more dramatic and violent ways, and the Davis family was on the brink of a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The situation was about to explode, and the lives of everyone involved were about to change forever. November 3rd, 2021 started like any other in Clearwater, but for the Davis family, it would be a day that would change their lives forever. The city seemed peaceful, with its tree-lined streets and peaceful houses. But inside the Davis home, a storm was about to break loose. That morning, Mark and Linda tried to return to normal amid the growing tension. Mark was especially worried about the situation and decided to spend the day at home, promising Linda that he would do everything in his power to protect the family. He was aware that Julia had become increasingly unpredictable and aggressive, and the fear that something terrible might happen was present in his thoughts. Linda, although worried, tried to maintain a normal routine to protect her children from the increasing stress. She organized activities for the children and tried to create a safe and stable environment. However, the constant fear of Julia's presence hovered over the house. As the afternoon progressed, Julia, driven by a new bout of obsession, decided to act more directly. She had decided that she could no longer wait for Mark to make a decision about their relationship. Julia's desire to end Mark's family life and have him completely for herself turned into a terrible plan. Around 7 p.m., Linda was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard a noise at the front door. Initially thinking it might be Mark coming home, she approached the door to check. However, when Linda opened the door, she found Julia with a determined expression and a cold look that made her heart race. With behavior that bordered on frenzy, pushed the door inwards and entered the house. Linda tried to resist, but Julia was relentless. The argument between the two women quickly escalated into a physical fight. Julia, possessing unexpected strength fueled by fury, brutally attacked Linda. The scene was marked by screams and the sound of objects being dropped as the fight unfolded. Mark arrived home a few minutes after the attack began. Upon opening the door, he was immediately confronted by a horrific scene. Julia was on top of Linda, who was lying on the floor, visibly injured. The shocking sight of his wife being attacked by Julia caused Mark to panic. He tried to separate the two, but the situation was out of control. Julia, in a fit of anger and despair, was not willing to back down. Mark managed to call the police as he tried to stop the attack, but unfortunately, he was too late. When officers arrived on the scene, they found Linda seriously injured. Despite attempts to save her life, Linda was pronounced dead at the scene. Julia was immediately detained and taken to the police station. The impact of the tragedy was devastating. Mark, in shock and unable to process the loss of his wife, was devastated. His children, who were in the house during the attack, were taken to stay with relatives while Mark dealt with the pain and grief. The event shocked the Clearwater community. The city, which had always been known for its calm and security, was now marked by a tragedy involving obsession and violence. The case attracted media attention and became a topic of discussion throughout the region. The November 3, 2021 episode marked the culmination of the tragedy that had unfolded over the previous months. Julia's attack not only destroyed a family, but also exposed the depth of her psychopathy and the severity of the consequences of her obsessive control. The stage was set for the trial and the consequences that would follow. After the brutal murder of Linda Davis, Clearwater was plunged into a period of grief and uncertainty. Julia Carter's case became the center of attention in local and national media, and the trial promised to be one of the most talked about and controversial in the region. Julia Carter, now in custody, was facing first-degree murder charges. His arrest was widely reported, and the public was eager to understand the details of the crime and the motivations behind the violence. The preliminary hearings were filled with intense emotions and heated debates about the nature of the crime and Julia's psychopathy. Julia's trial began on January 12, 2022, at the Clearwater Courthouse. The room was filled with journalists, members of the local community, and, of course, Linda's family, who were there to seek justice. Mark Davis, now widowed and devastated by the loss, was present at every hearing. His tired appearance and blank stare reflected the deep pain he was experiencing. The prosecution presented a solid case, supported by overwhelming evidence. Witnesses were called to describe Julia's obsessive and threatening behavior, as well as the horrific crime scene they witnessed. Accounts of previous threats made by Julia and the psychological impact her behavior had on Mark and his family were presented to the court. Defense lawyers tried to argue that Julia had mental problems that affected her behavior. They presented expert witnesses to attest to Julia's psychological condition and suggest that she was not fully responsible for her actions. However, these claims were met with skepticism and were widely contested by the prosecution. The most impactful moment of the trial was Mark Davis's testimony. In an emotional testimony, Mark described the indescribable pain of losing his wife and the devastating impact Julia's violence had on his family. He spoke about his attempts to protect his family and the helplessness he felt as he watched the situation spiral out of control. Mark's testimony left the audience in tears and was a crucial turning point in the prosecution's case. The jury, after carefully deliberating the case, found Julia Carter guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with a mixture of relief and sadness. Although there was a sense of justice being served, the pain of the loss and the impact on the Davis family remained a painful reality. Julia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His sentence was announced at a subsequent hearing, where the judge reiterated the seriousness of the crimes and the need to protect society from individuals with such dangerous behavior. The impact of Julia Carter's trial and conviction was profound. The tragedy had left an indelible mark on the Clearwater community, and the case was widely discussed on news programs, talk shows, and public debates. The violence and obsession that led to the murder of Linda Davis became a grim example of the dangers that can arise when obsession turns into extreme violence. For Mark Davis and his children, Julia's conviction did not bring true peace. The pain of losing Linda and the destruction of their family continued to be a constant part of their lives. Mark faced a future full of challenges as he tried to rebuild his life and provide a stable, safe environment for his children. Julia Carter's case served as a disturbing reminder of the limits of obsessive behavior and the devastating impact it can have on people's lives. The Clearwater community, now scarred by tragedy, continued to recover and reflect on the difficult lessons learned from the case. With Julia Carter's trial concluded and the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole pronounced, Clearwater was slowly beginning to recover from the shadow that had hung over the city. However, the scars left by the tragedy continued to affect the community and the Davis family, and the consequences of the case were still evident in many aspects of local life. Mark Davis, now a man scarred by loss and grief, was trying to rebuild his life as best he could. The pain over his wife's death and the trauma associated with Julia's case were still palpable. Mark sought solace in therapy sessions and the support of friends and family, but the healing process was long and difficult. He also began getting involved in community initiatives to help other families affected by violence and trauma, hoping to turn their pain into something positive. Mark's children, who had witnessed the tragedy in one way or another, were receiving specialist psychological support to deal with the emotional impact of the event. Local schools offered additional support to help children adjust and process the trauma they had experienced. The community came together to ensure the Davis family did not face the struggle alone, offering practical and emotional help. The city of Clearwater, known for its peaceful and friendly atmosphere, has seen an increase in public debate over safety and mental health issues. Julia Carter's case highlighted the importance of identifying signs of obsessive behavior and psychopathies before they become dangerous. Many local organizations and support groups have begun promoting mental health awareness campaigns, violence prevention, and support resources for people at risk. Furthermore, the case sparked discussions about how the justice system could be more effective in dealing with individuals with mental disorders and dangerous behaviors. Local authorities began to review their intervention and support protocols for victims, looking for ways to prevent similar situations in the future. The impact of the case extended beyond Clearwater, sparking national discussions about how to deal with cases of obsession and violence. Linda Davis's legacy was also fondly remembered. Friends and family organized a memorial in his honor, which included a donation to organizations that work with victims of violence and psychological support. The memorial served as a tribute to Linda's life and as a reminder of the importance of protecting and supporting those facing similar situations. Julia Carter's case, although closed in court, continued to provoke profound reflections on the nature of human behavior and the limits of obsession. The city of Clearwater, now scarred by this tragedy, faced the reality that even the most peaceful places can be impacted by violent events, and that the work of healing and prevention is an ongoing effort. Mark Davis, despite facing unimaginable loss, began to find some degree of peace and purpose in helping others. The fight for justice and healing for her family was not just a personal matter, but a mission to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. Julia Carter's story, with its complexities and consequences, served as a dark study in psychopathy and obsession, reminding everyone that violence can come from where you least expect it. The city of Clearwater, with its scars and reflections, continued to rebuild itself, marked by a tragedy that challenged the notions of safety and normalcy that had once been an integral part of its identity.